So, but we also can't wait for imminent threat to emerge, because when 1991 reforms happened and practically all parties came together, maybe the left wasn't there. Uh, but how do we bring in civility, rationality, and objectivity in political discourse?
I wish I had a formula. Obviously, personal example. At least some legislators across parties who care for the legislative work and democracy, who have respect for the democratic process, exhibiting a different standard of debate and conduct. Hopefully that will, over time, improve. Second, the leaders realizing that in the long term, the public support and the attention will be with the quality of conduct and the quality of debate rather than the noise you make. That means we, the voters, have an obligation to reward better conduct. If you reward bad conduct consistently and punish better conduct because that's not very visible to us, then we are sending a signal also. Market is sending a signal to the political process. So we, the voters, also have an obligation, not merely during the voting time, but the rest of the 5 years. Now, if somebody makes a meaningful comment with well-researched comment, you ignore that in the social media and the media. If somebody speaks outrageously, you have endless debates on that in your TV channels and social media. What is the signal you are sending to the country? That you don't care for what is right. And in an era when publicity is all that matters, there is nothing like bad publicity. The only bad thing is not having publicity. That is the era in which we are in the world. Naturally, legislators are human beings. They want more publicity. At what cost? They don't care. So it's also partly our responsibility. And the quality of recruitment. You see, in order to be able to debate, you must be well informed. Public issues are very complex. They're not given to easy yes or no. The nuances, the logic, the evidence, the experience, the insights, the exposure, and then understanding the global practices, all this requires enormous effort. So a lot of organizations like FDR, think tanks, they must generate data, evidence, dispassionately, calmly, evidence-based, logically, and put it in the public domain. They must be willing to listen, and as long as the logic and evidence are impeccable, they must embrace it. You may or may not agree with somebody's views, but facts cannot be altered. And logic, there are certain logical frame. There is a certain logical frame. You can't have your own inverted logic. After that, depending on your worldview, you can have different conclusions. Nothing wrong. Let there be debate. That's the marketplace of ideas, politics. So that kind of a discipline, all this takes time and effort. It also means quality education. Our education, in the most part, is so substandard. Let me be very blunt. We are blaming the politicians and the legislatures. How many so-called educated Indians have some minimal understanding of the grand issues of the country? How impulsively and in a polarizing manner, with prejudice in the heart, caste, region, religion, etc., we are coming to rash conclusions without evidence and logic. So how can we blame merely a few politicians? It's also the culture of society and media. All the media pundits, what kind of garbage are we, what kind of a drivel are we propagating? I'm sorry for using harsh words. I have great respect for the media. But it doesn't mean that everything that's given to us in the media is right. The method as well as the content are disgraceful. So there's a deeper crisis of public discourse in India. So civility comes from a combination of all this. But we're all optimists. And I believe a new generation of Indians is emerging. And these young people, they understand the ways of the world. They understand their best interests. In a complex world, how do we forge ahead as families and individuals? How do we build a harmonious society while building prosperity? I think there's an increasing understanding and hunger. And the new generation must first set the example in their own conduct. And they then must put pressure on the media, on the political parties, and in the legislatures. And I'm sure then that will happen. Because if the demand is different, politicians also respond to the demand. After they must get elected, they must get popularity, they must get power. And if they believe that they're getting elected, they're getting popularity, they're getting power, depend on the quality of their debate and the conduct, they'll behave well. Trust me, even some of the so-called bad legislators, when the opportunity is given or when the incentives are right, they can actually come up with very sensible debates and discussions.
So, sir, let's assume that there's a family of 12 to 14. The 3 to 4 generations are living together. each member in that family has different views, different choices, tastes, and whatsoever. But when it comes to making certain decisions, important, significant, big decisions, despite having diverging opinions at certain times, more or less they go with the say of the head of the family. I'm not saying he has the only say, but he has a larger weightage. So do you think this is a good situation to be in, or this structure of family is not?
No, everywhere, you like it or not, some degree of hierarchy is inevitable. In a family, much more so because there is a genetic bond.
Right.
There is a natural presumption backed by evidence and biology that the parents care for their children on the whole, right? Because after all, if nothing else, there's a selfish need to propagate your genes, khandan. That's why the family bonds are so strong. Doesn't mean that they don't fight. They often fight, they often disagree, and there are cases where they perhaps even hate each other. But on the whole, it works because there is a biological imperative and a social imperative. But in society, without the biological imperative, how do you create the framework?
In political parties, if we have to apply this formula, there is some sort of an ideological imperative. There will be certain parties which have certain belief system, or they believe in certain policy systems. So even in a political party, if it might not be blood relation, but there is definitely an imperative of ideology, the way they think. So, you've mentioned whip several times. Don't you think that whip also, the usage of whip is mostly pertaining to voting? Restriction on how you speak about certain issues that are not affecting the policies of the political party. For instance, I'd like to give an example of a business organization. If there's a business organization wherein they're selling a certain product and the employee of that particular company starts talking bad about it, then definitely that'll defame the business organization. So if that can be regulated, why can't a political worker of that party be regulated? Because in a way, he has all the freedom to quit the party and join somewhere else.
There are several fallacies in this argument. The first fallacy is the assumption that the whip is used for an ideological purpose. I'll give you two outstanding cases that altered Indian history for the worse. Take the Muslim Women's Bill. Congress party foolishly imposed a bad law on the country to overcome a sensible, very moderate, mild Supreme Court judgment, because the Congress government at that time feared the clergymen of the Muslim community at the cost of the ordinary Muslim women. Many Muslim members of Congress party, including in parliament, they opposed it. Arif Muhammad Khan, the present governor of Kerala, was one such person who was a minister in the Union government. He opposed. In fact, he staked his political career for that. So the whip was not used for ideology. Whip was used for naked, short-term political purposes. Bad assessment, they didn't gain. But the damage is done. Ramaswamy impeachment case. Narasimha Rao government gave a whip to his party members in parliament to record the vote as present but abstaining from voting, and therefore the impeachment failed. There was no opposition to impeachment. But the constitution says 2/3 of the members present and voting and not less than 50% of the members of the house. Because 2/3 of the members present and voting did not support it, a significant number abstained, though disciplining the judiciary when they go wrong is necessary, accountability is necessary, that failed. That sent a signal to judiciary that judiciary cannot be now held to account. That continues even today. So these two illustrations are good examples to show that the whip is not used in the interest of the public good or ideology, first of all. Second, parties are not rigid, permanent organizations that never change. Parties change. As the context changes, as the people's needs, and as each generation's attitudes change, parties also change. In the 1950s, socialist parties in Europe were based on the Soviet model. Over time, they became Fabian socialists. If not 1950s, 1930s, 1940s. Then they changed. The basic, the humanistic impulse, the moral impulse of equality, they retained. But the means they changed from dictatorship of the proletariat to education, healthcare, basic amenities and opportunities. In a way, much of the world today is Fabian socialist. But the parties have changed. Later, what is called Euro-communism came in Italy and other countries. They further tried to improve. So parties change. The left-wing parties, which completely shunned or denounced market economy, they realized that the countries that had state control and state socialism collapsed. Soviet Union, Eastern Europe. What happened? The Labour Party in Britain under Tony Blair became a middle of the road party. Similarly, a party like Democratic Party under Bill Clinton became a centrist party. So parties change. If parties never change, if you bring 15th century ideas to 21st century, irrespective of the circumstances, you are irrelevant. Now, how does that change come? Through the mind of some human being? No. Unless the general public mood changes with changed circumstances, changed evidence, better logic, better lessons learned from past experience. And unless this translated into more and more members getting elected in the party's echelons of power, both as legislators and as influential members of the party. If the orthodoxy of one human being, because like, for instance, what happened to Labour Party? Jeremy Corbyn. No, he is a 1940s dinosaur of the left wing. What happened to that party and the country? Time and again, the party was destroyed in the elections. Ultimately, he himself had to quit and they had to throw him out. So parties change. Parties are not permanent, unchanging instruments. How will change occur if there is no room for dissidence? Right. As long as the views are expressed rationally, ultimately majority prevails. And if your view ultimately is logically more appealing, and if more people are likely to support you, eventually you convert a minority into majority. That's how parties change. That's how countries change. That's how a whip is a bad idea under any circumstances. But I'm not saying that will automatically bring in El Dorado. No. That probably will lead to party hopping, higher arms, gaya arms, instability. So let's create some institutional safeguards for that. We can look at that. Constructive no confidence, some other methods, better electoral system. But this is not the method. This actually, the remedy is worse than the disease. Net result is that.
Well, the basis of any democratic state is liberty. And from, what I can draw from your argument here is that there should be a middle path of let's say, the freedom of expressing opinion should not be so much to an extreme that you again get into a situation of instability, ayaram, gayaram, and it should not also resist a change. So how do we draw balance in between of these two?
No, that's why you see, we have so many layers in a democracy. Why is constitution so sacrosanct? And in particular, the basic features we regard in India for sacrosanct, because there is some unchanging framework. Because if everything is questioned every day, if nothing is sacrosanct, then you don't have an anchor. Right. And therefore, the constitution, the court system, independence of judiciary, etc. After that, the party's core principles, they may evolve over time, but suddenly you don't take a 180-degree turn without any just cause. And that's where the party's adherence, not in India. India parties have no serious ideology, which is partly good, partly bad. Partly good because we don't have the dinosaurs approach. It's partly bad because we don't have any adherence to any principle at all. But elsewhere, supposing you adhere to that forever, it's a very dangerous thing. Therefore, a mechanism by which there is no sudden deviation without just cause and an organic evolution depending on the circumstances in society. As your voters shift ground, as younger demographics come in, as the economic situation changes, as you see evidence from global comparisons, then attitudes change. Take, for instance, something like the voucher system in the United States. Democrats in the US, the most market-friendly country in the world, they hate voucher system. What is voucher system? Giving parents the freedom to educate where they think their children get best education. In India, we don't call it voucher system, but private schools are incredibly popular. Even the poorest families want to send their kids to private schools. They're not bothered about debates. They want their children to get good education. Experience teaches them that everywhere education is bad, but within that, private is perhaps a little better because they are afraid. The schools need your child to come there. Otherwise, they won't get the fee, not because they're better people. So society is already moved. Supposing a political party understands and says, I don't care if it's private or government, as long as government funded, and as long as the quality outcome is assured, I want education. Because the child is the center of our universe. Education is the purpose of education. Now, the party has changed from the old-fashioned thinking. So that's how real change happens. Otherwise, adhering to something forever and then saying it is unchangeable. Education must be, after all, it must be government funded. I am totally in agreement with that. It is the core function of the government, particularly school education. Some people may disagree. But outcome is what is the government's function. The process, whatever works best. That is the pragmatic leadership. Government, no matter whether you deliver or not, that is inflexible leadership which ultimately fails. So you must give space for the change.
So it's understood that public spirited citizens are being repelled by the political process. And what can we do about it? Like, would you like to share your experience for, making a point?
Pranay, you're absolutely right. World over, people hate democracy. People hate elected governments. People hate leaders. Actually, our country is a little better for a variety of reasons. More people probably support the government, more people have positive attitudes in general, as opposed to America, Britain, or other countries. That healthy skepticism is welcome. Having said that, what is happening in India is something more curious. In the rest of the world, the more educated you are, the better off you are, the more participating you are in political process. You vote, you engage. In India, paradoxically, the poorer people, the less literate people, less economically, the people with less economic opportunity, they are voting in large numbers, almost universally. The better off people who are talking all the time about how bad politics is or how bad the country is run, they are shunning electoral process and voting. It's a very unhealthy and dangerous trend, because if we assume that poor and illiterate people with a rural background and completely influenced by caste system, and because of poverty influenced by money power and other things, and because of the power of the caste and the social institutions of tradition and their lives, their attitudes will be somewhat detrimental to democracy. That is the presumption. Then the people who can overcome some of these prejudices must vote in larger numbers. Otherwise, why will political parties change their approach? And caste, region, religion, etc., if you're voting only for those things. So there must be people who act on the basis of their collective self-interest. What is best for my family, for our community, for our society? Now, if such people shun voting and then use the fashionable argument that politics is bad, it's dirty, therefore I'm washing my hands off, they're being stupid. Let me be blunt about it. They're being illogical. As many people from Plato to current day said, by shunning politics, you're inviting bad governments. That's the punishment that we incur. So we have to pay attention. Doesn't mean you have to be a member of a political party. Doesn't mean you have to contest, but recognize that your vote is important. And even if a single vote does not seem to make a difference, collectively our votes are treasured by those in power. And if you don't vote, no matter how much you shout, parties quite rightly don't care about you. You are dead for the political process. Only if you vote, they take you seriously, because then your vote counts. It makes a difference to their electoral fortunes. And only by collective assertion over a period of time will parties also change their things. How did economic reform come? Earlier we had a brief mention of that. How did that come? A 180-degree turn in some respects in a very complex and fractious country with a socialist mindset for generations. How did reform come? Because slowly ideas spread. People through experience realized that the current model of nationalization, government control of the economy, license permit control laws will not work. So if you don't engage, if you don't create the climate, how will things change? Therefore, there is no substitute to these groups voting, and therefore I am actually in favor of some harsh measures like compulsory voting. It doesn't mean that you must punish them in terms of jail, but some economic incentive or some economic pain. 1,000 rupee tax incentive versus you have to pay extra tax. And the fact that it is mandatory so that there is a moral compulsion. Similarly, alternative electoral systems which encourage more and people to participate in a proportionality model, invariably there is a 10% or so higher electoral participation. So different models giving space to your own thinking and the confidence that with my ideas I can get some people in the legislature, therefore my voice is heard. So reforms are required, but at the same time, the middle classes in particular and the young people, you cannot shun politics. It will be to your detriment.
Sir, you just mentioned one way to go about is, by voting. I mean, being aware of the votes where you're casting. I mean, but that comes with the condition that you will be voting for the parties that are prevalent right now. I mean, that situation is not something what I can control. I can only react to that or respond to that. So apart from, voting, that is a long-term solution where the parties probably, come up which give a better alternative, and then I give them my vote. In short run, what solutions or what ways can a civilian adopt?
Now, in addition to voting, there are two things. Voting is one part, once in 5 years it happens. In between, political parties and leaders and governments do listen to people, provided there is a coherent vision expressed by a sufficient number of people. What I would call collective, informed assertion, not rabble-rousing, not shouting from rooftops, not confusing a high decibel level with logic, but collective, informed assertion in a very innovative approach. We must find all our ingenuity to express these views in an interesting manner, in an arresting manner. And there's so much of creative talent. You can deploy some of it for this cause also. That is one way. The second is come up with also innovative ideas and models, increasingly. The third is fight for a bigger agenda, namely, let the government focus on the core purposes of government. At least to the extent that the government is not the giver of services, if they are possible to be given by the market, multiple players, then the damage done by the government and bad politics is minimized. And sometimes if politics is in the short term a bit messy, right now in some respects politics is messy because the money power in politics, the vote buying and expenditure is actually increasing, not decreasing. Let's be truthful. And some other factors, electability, etc. Given the electoral system, there are problems. While we fight for a better electoral system and better politics overall, at least protect the economy. No, don't ever come to the mistaken belief that all parties are bad. There's nothing to choose between them, because even in the most horrific situation, what the parties stand for, their core DNA at a point of time, there is a difference. It's not big enough. It's not a moral difference. They're equally cynical in the exercise of power. But supposing a party believes in economic growth, fiscal prudence, and giving power and responsibility to people, more than another party which still believes in the old-fashioned failed principles, fiscal profligacy, no reckless abandon of economic growth as a project for the country, and job creation and wealth creation as a project for the country, then they're telling you their vision. You decide then what is in your best interest as an individual and as a collective. So there is no perfection. Anywhere in the world, and in India in particular, we have extremely imperfect political process. But this is what we have. And countries which don't have even this, they realize how much of power we exercise, how lucky we are, that there's peaceful transfer of power, your voice ultimately is heard. Go to Pakistan today, even in occupied Kashmir and all that, they're saying we want to be part of India, not because they suddenly love India, because they are so disgusted with the Pakistani political process. Right. Even our relatively failed process, we could do much better. It's much better, it's much more healthy. Bangladesh is doing a reasonable job. Nobody can say Bangladesh is perfect, but at least they're promoting economic growth, job creation, employment, per capita income rising, prosperity levels rising. So there are always choices. It's not true that there are no choices. It's a question of weightage you give to what issue. If you are so imbued by caste and religion from morning to evening and give weightage to that, or if you want to really bother about your children and their future, it's our choice.
So, sir, we're discussing legislature today. And legislature, out of all the three organs, is supposed to be the most representative in nature. And India being such a diverse country, as of now, what I feel is the diversity of our country is not very well reflected in the kind of legislature we have today. So, in future, I have two questions with regard to this. Firstly, do you think that we will ever come to a situation where, if not exactly, but in some proportion, the diversity of our nation is represented, there be in terms of gender, religion, language, economic status, and several other aspects? That's one. And when we, if at all, do have such a diversity being reflected there, will it make our legislatures even more effective or noisy?
First of all, I don't completely agree with the statement that our legislatures don't represent our people. With all imperfections that we discussed, broadly, all political parties across the spectrum try to maximize their voter base. They try to accommodate the wishes and the aspirations and the concerns of a large section of people. First, let us respect that. No, everything is not bad in India. If that's the case, democracy would not have survived. There would not have been peaceful transfer of power. There would be revolutions every day on the street. That's not true. But we could do better. First, let's have that perspective. Our politicians, however ugly political processes, are doing a remarkable job of bringing everybody into the fold, the part of the political process. The second, obviously there's a need to make it even more representative. Women, for instance. Amazingly, the people of India, the voters of India are not opposed to women. There's ample evidence to show that if there are enough viable women candidates, viable meaning candidates of recognized major political parties. If you contest as an independent or minor political party, it's not a viable candidacy. So viable meaning candidates of a major recognizable political party. If enough people exist as candidates, then the voters are voting in large numbers for women. Actually, in greater numbers for women than for men, proportionately speaking. So the voters are not at fault in so far as women are concerned. But we fail to evolve sensible and practical models that give space to women. Instead, almost all political parties are lying to the people. They're indulging in all kinds of chicanery, hoodwinking, and symbolism without substance. A simple guarantee that in each state, the women candidates will be in proportion to the whatever proportion we choose, 1/3 or whatever, of each major political party, recognized party, without which a party loses recognition, or X number of candidates will lose the party symbol or some such thing which there, automatically parties will promote women leadership. Caste and religion are a little more complex because A, we are a heavily caste-ridden society where political mobilization is based on caste. B, we have a tortuous history of religion, though we are admirably secular and admirably syncretic in our civilization and our culture. But there are challenges. The best way, not so much for representation, but to improve politics itself, and therefore representation also is a byproduct. Because that's not the primary thing. As long as the government is running reasonably well, in British Parliament, just because women are not in sufficient numbers, there's no good reason to change the system. Whereas in India, there's a bigger reason. Our politics is messed up. Our elections are completely, in some respects, very sad. Money power, freebies, and divisions in society, primordial loyalties are dominating. And the kind of people who should be in public life, they're not getting space, except through upper houses nomination or something. And that can't go on forever. That's not a substitute to real popular mandate of the people. Therefore, a proportionality model of representation with sufficient safeguards to ensure that there is no excessive fragmentation, each caste becoming a thing, or safeguards against instability. For instance, you can say the largest party in the state or in the country in case of parliament, they get some 10% or so bonus seats. So there will be some disproportionality, but in a predictable manner, so that overall composition is proportional, but we're also guaranteeing some stability. Similarly, reasonable threshold so that each caste does not become a political party. Unless you get X percentage of vote, you won't get representation. So some of those things we can do, the tweaking. But fundamentally go towards a proportionality model. The benefit more than even proportionality is that there are altered incentives for the candidates and the voters. You no longer need to buy a vote. You are not afraid that if I don't buy a vote by hundreds of crores of rupees, I'll be eliminated. Because even if you lose 1 or 2% vote by not buying the vote, you may actually gain from others who respect that approach. And overall composition is based on the proportion of votes you get. So there's a tremendous re-altering of the incentives. And therefore the candidates who are now not electable become electable because their credibility that brings you reputation and vote percentage. The candidates who are now seen to be electable then will be a liability because their bad conduct makes the party less desirable. So to alter the incentives, proportionality model is a good way, and the Constitution provides space for that. Dr. Ambedkar and his colleagues understood this, and therefore they framed the Constitution in such a manner, the wording in such a manner that straight away by a simple law you can bring in proportional representation. It only requires a political consensus. So we can look at some of these models, but as I said, proportionality is not the primary goal here. It need not be, because it is not true to say that Indian politicians and parties are ignoring the needs of the bulk of the people, by and large, for their own political reasons. They have taken them into account. Certainly, yes, some groups are getting greater representation for a variety of reasons. But it's not because of lack of desire to represent the aspirations of all sections of people.
Sir, some of the reform measures that we have discussed during the course of our discussion, one being the proportionality representation and perhaps the separation of Part-2, but it seems that executive today is too strong to consider that. So if you were to suggest some of the reform measures, maybe short to medium term, that are needed to accelerate the process of bigger systemic reforms, what would those be?
First of all, Riti, the power of the context is the most powerful influence. No, in a certain situation, certain things happen. When there was this Tehelka scam, and the senior political leaders are accused of collecting cash, we used that as an opportunity to persuade all political parties and leaders to say, at least for legitimate political purposes, let there be a legitimate window, so that you don't have to collect money without honor. And they all embraced it. It's not a solution to all the problems of India, but at least there is a window for legitimate funding of legitimate politics. So the power of the context is very, very important. We have to wait and seize those moments. There was a time when it was possible. Unfortunately, the key decision makers, they failed to appreciate it, and they wasted an opportunity, they squandered an opportunity. During Manmohan Singh's first tenure, 2004 to 2009, it was a priceless opportunity for political change. But the very, what shall I say, unwise leadership of certain parties in the ruling coalition, those that supporting the government but did not think through the long-term consequences, that stalled it. But maybe such a time will come again. But there are other means. Certainly, to a very minimal extent, the leaders of the parties and the speakers of the houses of legislature can sit and say, let's simply enforce the existing rules. The legislative rules are impressive on paper. You don't have to even create more rules. If there is a consensus among party leaders that we will enforce the rules irrespective of party, that itself will significantly improve the quality of discussion and the conduct of the House. That will not change the politics overnight, but certainly creates a climate. Similarly, at least in urban areas where people are increasingly aware of not only their vote, but I'm paying taxes. Cities are now self-reliant. Earlier, people used to say, municipalities, where is the money, can't even pay salaries. It's not true. All the money is now in towns. The governments are fleecing money from the cities. They're not allowing the local governments to flourish. So if you merely have proper property taxation, fair taxation, and other means of revenue mobilization, there are enough resources. And people are saying, I'm paying so many taxes, property tax to income tax. Why are my roads bad? Why is my traffic so bad? And people are angry. And there's natural leadership there, intelligence there, ability there to solve problems. So at least in cities and urban areas, start with genuine local governance with some innovations. That will again create green shoots for democracy. So if you really are genuine about it, there are always opportunities. But in our country, on occasion we are utilizing them, but oftentimes we are messing up. Ramakrishna Hegde and Nazir Saab, they did a very good job in Karnataka, building local governments. But the constitutional amendment actually put a stop to that. Once the flexibility is gone, a bad model has come about. Therefore, at the very least, remove some of the impediments at the national level. Give states increasing freedom to experiment. As long as the fundamentals of the Constitution, universal franchise, democracy, federalism, accountability, independent judiciary, they are not altered. Allow the states freer play. Don't have one template for the whole country, because if you commit a mistake, the country pays a price. And for you to change is incredibly difficult in a very stagnant society or in a very inert society. All societies are inert, and the more ancient you are, the bigger you are, the more inert you are. Whereas in a smaller geography, somebody will make an experiment, it will work. So give greater space to states to innovate without undermining the constitutional edifice or the democratic structure. So if really you have will, there is a way. And we need not wait for that. No, in Karnataka and Bangalore, I keep seeing in social media, the people are organizing themselves, the voters are organizing, creating local committees, putting pressure on the city government and the state, so that the ward committees which are envisaged in the constitution are really becoming operational. It will take time. Nothing will happen in a hurry. But if you try it for a few years, you will find a new architecture, a new kind of a stable framework, and a new public mood. And once you institutionalize it to that level, it will be difficult to take it back. So we have to keep at it, keep at it, keep at it.
Thank you so much for such an engaging discussion, sir.
Thank you.
The eternal optimist in you has always been forward looking. And today in our discussion, you have laid down a wonderful roadmap which is quite achievable. I'm sure that this journey will not be without any speed breakers, but I'm sure it will be very smooth. And there will come a day where we will no longer require such sort of discussions. So thank you, JP sir, for coming and having this wonderful, enriching discussion. Thank you, everybody.